You know the feeling when your entire family sits behind your opponent like a board of directors ready to vote you out? I certainly do. My sister Sloane sat across the aisle wearing a smile that said the verdict was signed last night. She believed her money could crush me. But she forgot that you cannot bribe a properly executed trust or the man in the black suit who walked through the doors exactly 1 minute before the judge ruled. My name is Aurora West. I am 34 years old, and as I sat at the defendant's table in courtroom 4B, I realized that the silence of a courtroom is heavier than the silence of a grave. At least in a graveyard, the dead have the decency to leave you alone. Here, the silence was active. It was pressing against my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs, and demanding that I break. I kept my hands folded on the polished oak table. My knuckles were white, but my face was stone. I had practiced this face in the mirror for 3 days. It was a mask of absolute neutrality, designed to give nothing away. Across the aisle, my sister, Sloane Carver, sat with the posture of a queen who had already been crowned. Sloane was wearing a shade of beige that I knew for a fact cost more than my entire wardrobe. It was that specific brand of quiet luxury that screams wealth without ever raising its voice. No logos, no flashy hardware, just cashmere and silk draped over a body that had been sculpted by private Pilates instructors and organic diets. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy bun that pulled her features tight, emphasizing the sharp, predatory calculation in her eyes. She did not look at me. She looked through me, as if I were a smudge on a window that the cleaning crew had missed. Behind her sat the board of directors. That was what I called them in my head. My parents, Dean and Marjorie. They sat directly behind Sloane, leaning forward slightly, their bodies angled toward her as if she were the sun, and they were cold planets desperate for warmth. My father wore his navy suit, the one he reserved for weddings and funerals, and my mother was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. They were performing grief, but it was a shallow, rehearsed performance. I could see the tension in my father's jaw, the way he tapped his fingers on his knee. They were not mourning my grandfather. They were counting his money. The air in the room smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The court reporter was typing softly, a rhythmic click-clack that sounded like a ticking clock. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Vance entered. He was a man who looked like he had seen every variety of human greed and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of them. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and picked up the docket file. "In the matter of the estate of Grant West," Judge Vance read. Before the judge could even finish pronouncing my grandfather's name, Sloane stood up. It was a sharp, violent movement, like a jack-in-the-box springing open. She did not wait for the reverence of the moment to settle. To her, Grant West was no longer a person. He was no longer the man who had taught us how to fish in the creek behind the house, or the man who had snuck us peppermint candies during long church sermons. He was an asset. He was a portfolio of real estate, stocks, and bonds that needed to be liquidated and absorbed into her own empire. Her lawyer, Trent Holloway, stood up beside her. Trent was the kind of lawyer who smiled with his teeth, but never with his eyes. He wore a suit that was tailored so sharply it looked like it could cut skin. He placed a hand on the table, projecting an aura of aggressive competence. "Your Honor," Trent began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room, "we are filing a motion for the immediate transfer of all administrative powers regarding the estate to my client, Ms. Sloane Carver, given the irregularities in the final weeks of the decedent's life and the vulnerability of the assets. We believe this is the only way to ensure the estate is preserved." I watched my parents. As Trent spoke the words, "immediate transfer," Dean and Marjorie nodded. It was a synchronized movement, perfectly timed, as if they had practiced it in the car on the way over. Nod, pause, look solemn, nod, pause, look solemn. It made my stomach turn. They were selling out their own father's wishes for a promise of security from a daughter who would discard them the moment they became inconvenient. Trent continued, his voice dropping to a register of mock concern. We have reason to believe that delaying this transfer puts the estate at risk of dissipation. My client is a financial professional with a proven track record of managing high-value portfolios. She is the natural, logical choice to step in and stop the bleeding. The bleeding. As if my grandfather's legacy were a wounded animal that they needed to put out of its misery. Judge Vance looked over his glasses at Trent, then shifted his gaze to Sloane. Sloane offered him a tight, respectful smile, the kind she used on donors at her charity galas. It was a smile that said, "I am one of the good ones. Trust me." Then, the judge turned his eyes to me. I felt the weight of the room shift. Sloane turned her head slightly, just enough so I could see the corner of her mouth twitching upward. She was holding back a laugh. She knew I was alone at my table. She knew I did not have the money for a lawyer like Trent Holloway. She knew I had spent the last 2 years caring for our grandfather, while she was busy building her brand in the city. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to stutter, to cry, to make a scene that would prove I was too emotional and unstable to handle serious business. "Ms. West," Judge Vance said, his voice neutral. "You are the named defendant in this petition. Do you have any objection to the motion for immediate transfer?" The room went silent, absolutely silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause. I could feel Sloane's anticipation radiating across the aisle like heat. She was waiting for the humiliation. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to say something about how it wasn't fair, so she could roll her eyes and look at the judge with a knowing expression that said, "See, she is a child." I took a breath. I inhaled for a count of 4, held it for 4, and exhaled for 4. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The terror that had been hammering in my chest moments ago had crystallized into something cold and hard. I looked at the judge. I did not look at Sloane. I did not look at my parents. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice was clear. It did not shake. "I object." Trent Holloway sighed loudly, a theatrical sound meant to convey his exhaustion with my incompetence. Sloane leaned over and whispered something to him, likely a joke about how pathetic this was. "On what grounds?" Judge Vance asked, leaning back in his chair. He looked bored. He wanted to go to lunch. He wanted this simple family squabble to be over so he could move on to actual criminals. "Do you have evidence to present? Do you have a counter motion filed?" I looked at the empty seat next to me. Then I looked at the double doors at the back of the courtroom. They remained closed. "I do not have a counter motion at this second, Your Honor," I said. Sloane let out a small, audible scoff. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Then why are we wasting the court's time?" Trent Holloway interjected, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, Ms. West is clearly stalling. She has no counsel, she has no filings, and she has no legal basis to stop this transfer. Every hour we delay is an hour the estate sits in limbo." Judge Vance looked at me again, his patience thinning. "Ms. West, if you do not have a legal argument, I am going to grant the motion. This is a court of law, not a place for sentimental delays." I stood my ground. I did not fidget. I did not apologize. "I am not stalling for sentiment, Your Honor," I said. "I am asking the court to pause for 10 minutes. 10 minutes? The judge asked, frowning. "For what?" I looked directly into Judge Vance's eyes. "We are waiting for the last person." A ripple of confusion went through the room. My mother, Marjorie, leaned forward and whispered loudly to my father. "Who is she talking about?" My father shook his head, looking annoyed. Sloane laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter that she quickly tried to cover with a cough, but the malice was unmistakable. She stood up halfway, bracing her hands on the table, and glared at me. "There is no one else, Aurora," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Grandpa is dead. It is just us. Stop living in a fantasy world and let the adults handle the finances." She looked at the judge, flashing that perfect, polished smile again. "Your Honor, there is no other party involved in this estate. My sister is distraught. She is imagining things. Please, let us end this so she can get the help she needs." It was a brilliant move. Paint me as hysterical. Paint me as delusional. If I was crazy, then taking the money away from me was an act of mercy. Judge Vance looked at me, his expression hardening. Ms. West, I am warning you. This is a courtroom, not a stage for dramatic reveals. If you do not have a valid legal reason to keep these proceedings open, I am signing the order. I felt the adrenaline surge, but I pushed it down. I did not need to shout. I did not need to cry. I just needed to hold the line. I understand, Your Honor, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. But if you sign that order now, you will be signing an illegal document. The petition before you is incomplete. Trent Holloway slammed his hand on the table. That is a baseless accusation. It is not an accusation, I said, cutting him off. It is a fact, and that is why I need the record to be complete before you put your name on anything. I lifted my left wrist and checked my watch. It was an old watch, a simple leather strap with a silver face that my grandfather had given me when I graduated college. The second hand swept past the 12. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I did not look panicked. I did not look like a woman who was praying for a miracle. I looked like a woman who had scheduled an appointment and was simply waiting for the other party to arrive. He is late, I said, mostly to myself, but the microphone picked it up. Who is late? Judge Vance demanded, his patience finally snapping. Ms. West, you have 30 seconds to explain yourself, or I am holding you in contempt and granting the motion. I looked at Sloane, for the first time all morning. Her smile faltered. She saw something in my face that she had not expected. She expected fear. She expected desperation. Instead, she saw certainty. Just wait, I said softly. The room held its breath. My mother was gripping the back of Sloane's chair so hard her knuckles were white. Trent Holloway was already uncapping his expensive fountain pen, ready to sign the victory papers. The bailiff shifted his weight, looking at the clock. I counted down in my head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I turned my body toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. I knew what was coming. They thought they were fighting a girl who didn't know the difference between a trust and a will. They thought they were fighting a sister who could be bullied into submission by a family vote. They were wrong. They weren't fighting me. They were fighting the carefully laid plans of a man they had underestimated for his entire life. And the messenger was about to arrive. I fixed my eyes on the brass handle of the courtroom door. Just wait, I repeated, and then the handle turned. The heavy oak door did not slam open. It did not creak or shudder. It simply swung inward with a terrifying, oiled precision, revealing the corridor beyond. The air in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. A man stepped across the threshold. He was not what I expected a savior to look like, nor did he look like a villain. He looked like the physical embodiment of a non-negotiable contract. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet and 2 inches, wearing a suit of absolute, uncompromising black. It was not charcoal, not midnight blue, and certainly not the textured designer fabric Trent Holloway was sporting. It was a flat, light-absorbing black. His white shirt was crisp enough to cut paper, and he wore no tie. There was no gold watch on his wrist, no wedding band on his finger, and no lapel pin. He was completely unadorned, stripped of any detail that might give a person something to latch onto. He carried nothing but a thick manila envelope held loosely in his left hand. The silence in the room changed texture. Before, it had been the silence of anticipation. Now, it was the silence of confusion. Sloane turned in her seat, her neck craning to see who had dared to interrupt her coronation. I watched her eyes dart over him, scanning for a brand name, a familiar face, or a sign of weakness. She found nothing. She frowned, her perfectly lined lips parting slightly, as if she were about to demand he identify himself. But the man did not give her the chance. He did not look at her. He did not look at my parents, who were staring at him with their mouths slightly agape. He did not even look at me. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that was neither hurried nor slow. It was the walk of a man who knows exactly how much space he occupies and exactly where he is going. He moved past the gallery, past the bar, and walked straight toward the court clerk's desk as if he were the only living soul in the room. The bailiff, who had been half asleep by the wall, straightened up and took a step forward, his hand drifting toward his belt. But he stopped. There was an authority in the man's movement that made interference feel like a mistake. The man stopped in front of the partition separating the gallery from the litigation area. He looked at the empty space in the room, his eyes scanning the layout before settling on the clerk. Then, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room with crystal clarity. It was a baritone devoid of emotion, a voice made for reading technical manuals and death sentences. "Aurora West," he said. It was not a question. It was a verification. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I did not move. I stayed frozen, my hands still clasped on the table. The sound of my name in his mouth sounded final. Sloane made a noise, a sharp intake of breath. She turned to Trent Holloway, whispering furiously, asking who this was. Trent shook his head. His eyes narrowed, fixated on the envelope in the man's hand. The man walked past the defendant's table and approached the bench. He did not ask for permission to approach. He simply arrived. He placed the thick envelope on the clerk's elevated desk with a soft, heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gavel strike. "Notice to the court," the man said, stepping back one pace. "From Stonegate Fiduciary Trust," Judge Vance, who had been ready to scold the intruder for the interruption, froze. His eyebrows, which had been drawn together in irritation, shot upward. The name Stonegate clearly meant something to him. It was not a local law firm. It was not a family practice. It was an institution known for handling wealth that was too large to be liquid and too complex to be stolen. The judge reached out and took the envelope. He opened the clasp, sliding out a stack of documents that were bound with a heavy blue spine. He put on his reading glasses, his demeanor shifting instantly from bored bureaucrat to alert jurist. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Vance said, his eyes scanning the first page. "Did you run a search for trust filings in the state registry before you filed this petition?" Trent Holloway stood up, buttoning his jacket, trying to regain the control he had lost 30 seconds ago. "We did, Your Honor. The search came back clean. Grant West held his assets personally. That is why we are in probate." "Apparently, your search was insufficiently thorough," Judge Vance said dryly. He flipped a page, the paper crinkling loudly. "Or perhaps the filings were sealed until the moment of death. As is the prerogative of certain high-level instruments," the judge looked up at the man in black. "You are the representative?" "I am the courier for the trustee," the man replied. "The trustee is a corporate entity. The documents are self-authenticating." Sloane could not take it anymore. She stood up, her bracelets clinking together. "Your Honor, I object to this ambush. We have no idea what those papers are. My grandfather was senile. He could have signed anything in his confusion. Whatever that is, it cannot supersede a valid petition for—" "Sit down, Ms. Carver," Judge Vance snapped. He did not look up from the documents. "You will want to hear this." Sloane sat, but she looked like she had been slapped. Her face was flushing a deep, angry red. The judge continued to read, his lips moving silently as he parsed the legal jargon. Then, he looked at Trent. "This document certifies that 48 hours prior to his passing, the entirety of Grant West's estate, including the real property at the lake, the portfolio at Chase, and the holdings in Westridge, was transferred into the Grant West Irrevocable Trust." The word irrevocable hung in the air like smoke. Trent Holloway paled. He knew what that word meant. A revocable trust dies with the grantor or can be changed. An irrevocable trust is a steel vault poured in concrete. Once the assets are in, they are no longer the property of the person who died. They belong to the trust, and the trust does not die. "That is impossible," Trent stammered. "We have bank statements from last month showing the accounts in his name, And here's the transfer confirmation from the bank, dated 4 days ago, Judge Vance said, holding up a sheet of paper. The assets were moved, all of them, out. There is no estate for this court to probate, Mr. Holloway. There is nothing for your client to manage. The estate is empty. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp behind me. Empty? She whispered. What does he mean? Empty. Judge Vance looked over his glasses at the man in black. And the designated trustee? Stonegate Fiduciary Services, the man said, acting as corporate trustee with full discretionary power. I saw the color drain out of Sloane's face. This was the one thing she had not calculated. She had prepared to fight me. She had prepared to fight a family member she could manipulate, bully, or outspend. She had prepared to fight a local bank she could charm. But a corporate trustee? A faceless institution based in another city, regulated by federal statutes, and immune to tears or tantrums? You cannot invite a corporation to lunch to smooth things over. You cannot guilt-trip a board of directors by crying about your childhood. This is ridiculous, Sloane hissed, leaning toward Trent. Fix it. Tell him it is a mistake. Trent remained standing, but his posture had collapsed. He looked like a man who had brought a knife to a drone strike. Your Honor, we contest the validity of the trust. If Mr. West was not of sound mind. Page 4, the man in black said. It was the first time he had volunteered information since identifying the package. Judge Vance flipped to page 4. He read it, and then he let out a low whistle. He looked up at Trent, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of pity in the judge's eyes. Mr. Holloway, the judge said softly, are you familiar with a no-contest clause? I am, Trent said, his voice tight. Are you familiar with a nuclear no-contest clause? The judge asked. Trent went silent. It says here, Judge Vance read aloud, ensuring every word was audible, that any beneficiary who challenges the validity of this trust, or who seeks to interfere with the administration of the corporate trustee, or who files any motion to remove assets from the trust's protection, shall be immediately and permanently disinherited. Their share shall be forfeited and redistributed to the remaining beneficiaries as if the challenging party had predeceased the grantor. The room went absolutely still. I watched Sloane. She was not stupid. She understood exactly what had just happened. The motion she had just filed, the one demanding immediate transfer of the assets, was technically an attack on the trust's protection. She had just walked into a bear trap that my grandfather had set, and she was standing on the trigger plate. If she pressed down 1 inch harder, she would lose everything, not just control, but her inheritance. Judge Vance lowered the paper and looked directly at Sloane. Ms. Carver, were you aware that your grandfather had established this structure and assigned it to a professional organization? Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Trent, but Trent was busy reading the copy of the document the clerk had just handed him, his face ashen. He offered her no help. She was on her own. Sloane started, her voice shaking for the first time. She cleared her throat, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried her through the morning. I knew he was meeting with people, but he was influenced. He was old. Your Honor, he did not know what he was signing. Someone must have confused him. Her eyes darted to me. The accusation was implicit. She wanted to say, I had done it. She wanted to scream that I had tricked him, but she couldn't. The man in black was standing there, a physical reminder that this wasn't done by a granddaughter in a living room. This was done by professionals. Influenced? Judge Vance repeated. By Stonegate Fiduciary? That is a serious accusation. Ms. Carver, this document was notarized by 3 independent witnesses and accompanied by a certificate of independent legal review. This is the most bulletproof estate plan I have seen in 20 years on the bench. Sloane gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. The mask of quiet luxury was cracking. Underneath, she was just a greedy woman who had spent money she did not yet have. It does not matter, Sloane said, her voice dropping to a cold. desperate whisper. He was not competent. We will prove it. It was a brave statement, but her face betrayed her. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room as if searching for an exit. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she was not the smartest person in the room. The man in black turned his head slightly. He did not look at Sloane, but he angled his body so that his next words were directed at the space between the two tables. The trustee has also provided the medical capacity affidavit, he said. Recorded on video, dated the morning of the signing. Trent Holloway let the papers slip from his fingers onto the table. It was a subtle gesture of defeat. A video. They had a video of my grandfather, lucid and clear, signing the papers. Sloane's argument about dementia had just been strangled in the crib. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:05, 5 minutes ago. I was a defendant about to lose my family history. Now, I was a spectator to a demolition. And the man in the black suit stood by the clerk's desk, silent again, like a statue erected to the god of consequences. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The courtroom air had shifted from the sterile cold of procedure to the humid, suffocating heat of a street fight. The document regarding the irrevocable trust lay on the judge's bench like a loaded weapon that had just been fired, leaving ringing ears in its wake. Trent Holloway was scrambling. A lawyer of his caliber was not used to being blindsided, and certainly not by a piece of paper that rendered his entire strategy obsolete. He tried to salvage the wreckage. He stood up, smoothing his tie, trying to project authority over a situation that had clearly spiraled out of his control. "Your Honor," Trent began, his voice pitching slightly higher than before. "Trust or not, this court still retains jurisdiction over the welfare of the decedent. If the assets were moved under duress, the trust is void ab initio. We cannot just—" "Sit down, Mr. Holloway," Judge Vance said. He did not shout. He did not slam his gavel. He simply cut the air with his hand, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "You are arguing hypotheticals against a certified instrument. Unless you have proof of duress right now, in your briefcase, you are wasting my morning." Trent opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Sloane. For a brief second, the dynamic between them flipped. He was no longer the protector. He was the employee looking for an exit strategy. He sat down slowly, pulling his chair in, distancing himself from the blast radius. But Sloane Carver did not sit. Sloane was not a woman who accepted defeat. When the rules of the game turned against her, she did not fold. She simply kicked over the board. She looked at the judge, then at me. Her eyes were no longer cold. They were burning with a frantic, dangerous energy. She realized that the law, the dry black and white letter of the law, was no longer her ally. So she did what people in our family always did when they ran out of valid arguments. She reached for the story. "I need to speak," Sloane said. Her voice was suddenly loud, projecting to the back of the room, designed not for the judge, but for the court reporter's transcript. "I need this entered into the official record." Judge Vance sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Carver, your counsel has yielded." "My counsel does not know the whole truth," Sloane interrupted. She stepped out from behind the table. It was a breach of protocol, but she moved with such conviction that the bailiff hesitated. "The court is looking at paperwork, but paperwork can be forged. Signatures can be coerced. What you do not see, Your Honor, is what happened in that house for the last 6 months." She turned and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. It was a theatrical gesture, straight out of a primetime soap opera. But in the small, enclosed space of the courtroom, it was effective. "We are not just talking about a trust," Sloane said, her voice trembling with a carefully manufactured vibrato. "We are talking about financial exploitation." The phrase hung in the air. Financial exploitation. It was a legal term, specific and damaging. In the state statutes, it was a crime. It implied that I had preyed on a vulnerable elderly man, isolating him, confusing him, and draining his accounts while he was too weak to fight back. It was an accusation that could destroy a reputation forever. Behind Sloane, The chorus line began their performance. My mother, Marjorie, let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She brought her lace handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes widening in mock horror as if Sloane had just bravely spoken a dark secret they had all been too terrified to whisper. My father, Dean, stiffened his spine. He crossed his arms over his chest and glared at me, his face setting into a mask of grim determination. He was playing the role of the patriarch who had failed to protect his father from the bad seed of the family. We tried to intervene, Sloane continued, her voice gaining strength as she saw the judge listening. We tried to call, we tried to visit, but she gestured at me again. She blocked us. She changed the locks. She screened his calls. She told us he was too sick to see anyone, and now we know why. She was busy getting him to sign over his life to some faceless corporation while she pulled the strings. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that they were the ones who had stopped visiting. I wanted to scream that the only reason I changed the locks was because Dean had let himself in 3 months ago and tried to borrow the silver tea service. I wanted to tell the judge that the screening calls was actually grandfather telling me, "Tell them I am asleep. I cannot listen to them ask for money again." But I stayed silent. I knew that if I reacted, if I showed anger, I would look exactly like the unstable manipulator they were painting me to be. We are not the only ones, Sloane said. Turning toward the back of the courtroom, I brought witnesses, people who saw how she cut him off from the world. She gestured to the back row. 2 figures stood up awkwardly. It was Aunt Linda and her son, my cousin Ray. They were distant relatives, people we saw perhaps once every 3 years at a reunion if there was free food. They looked uncomfortable, clutching their bags, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Sloane had likely flown them in, put them up in a nice hotel, and coached them over breakfast. They can testify, Sloane said, that they tried to reach Grant West for his 90th birthday, and Aurora told them he was unavailable. She isolated him. Your Honor, that is the first step of abuse. Judge Vance looked at Aunt Linda and Ray, then back at Sloane. He did not look impressed. He looked tired. Ms. Carver, Judge Vance said, his voice cutting through the drama. This is a probate court, not a criminal tribunal. You are throwing around very serious words. Financial exploitation is a felony. Because it is a crime, Sloane shouted, abandoning the quiet luxury pretense entirely. She stole from him, and now she is hiding behind this trust. The judge leaned forward, clasping his hands. Do you have evidence? Sloane blinked. I have witnesses. I do not mean witnesses who made phone calls, Judge Vance said sharply. I mean evidence. Do you have police reports? Did you file a complaint with Adult Protective Services during the 6 months you claim this abuse was occurring? Do you have medical records indicating Mr. West was incompetent or bruised or malnourished? Do you have a single piece of paper from a third party that supports this narrative? The courtroom went quiet. Sloane's chest was heaving. She looked at Trent, but Trent was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. He knew that without a paper trail, this was just hearsay. He was proud. Sloane stammered, thinking fast. He was a proud man, Your Honor. He was ashamed. He did not want the police involved. He did not want the neighbors to know his granddaughter was abusing him. That is why there are no reports. We respected his dignity. You respected his dignity by letting him be abused? Judge Vance asked, his eyebrows raising. That is a very convenient explanation, Ms. Carver, but this court does not rule on feelings, and it certainly does not rule on the sudden, convenient recollections of family members who only seem concerned now that the checkbook is closed. It is not convenient, Marjorie shouted from the gallery. It is the truth. Order, Judge Vance barked, slamming his hand on the bench. One more outburst from the gallery and I will have the bailiff clear the room. He turned his eyes back to Sloane. You are asking me to overturn a notarized, independently reviewed legal instrument based on the fact that you feel your sister is a bad person. That is not how the law works." Sloane looked desperate. She was losing the narrative. She needed something to stick. But the trust, the trustee. How do we know they did not collude with her? How do we know she did not pay them off? It was a frantic, flailing accusation. Stonegate Fiduciary managed billions of dollars. The idea that I, a woman with less than $4,000 in her savings account, could bribe them was laughable. For the first time since he had placed the envelope on the desk, the man in the black suit moved. He did not step forward aggressively. He simply shifted his weight, turning his torso slightly so that he was addressing the judge. His presence was like a drop of ink in a glass of water, sudden, dark, and impossible to ignore. "Your Honor," the man said. His voice was calm, distinct, and utterly devoid of the hysteria that Sloane was projecting. Judge Vance looked at him. "Mr. Rourke, do you have a response to these allegations regarding the formation of the trust?" "I do," the man, Mr. Rourke, said. "Stonegate Fiduciary Trust has strict protocols for high net worth estate planning, specifically to prevent the exact scenario Ms. Carver is describing." He paused, letting the words sink in. He was telling them that this was routine, that their drama was not unique. It was a predictable variable that they had solved for. "We do not allow beneficiaries to be present during the drafting or signing of the instruments," Rourke continued. "When Mr. Grant West contacted us, we initiated a 3-step capacity verification. We sent our own independent geriatric psychiatrist to his home. We interviewed him alone for 4 hours over 2 separate days. We recorded these sessions." Sloane's face went pale. "Ms. Aurora West was not in the room," Rourke said, stating it as a cold fact. "She was not in the house. In fact, our logs show she was at her place of employment, working a shift at the library, during the signing. We have the time-stamped security footage from the library to corroborate this if the court requires." I felt a lump in my throat. I remembered that day. Grandfather had told me to go to work, that he had friends coming over to play chess. He had lied to protect me. He knew that if I was there, they would blame me. So he made sure I had an alibi I didn't even know I needed. "Furthermore," Rourke added, "during the private interview, Mr. West specifically addressed the issue of influence. He spoke at length about his family dynamics." Judge Vance leaned back, intrigued. "He did?" "Yes," Rourke said. "He was quite explicit about his relationships with his children and his grandchildren. He detailed exactly why he was making the decisions he was making. It was not a decision made in confusion. Your Honor, it was a decision made in exhaustion." Sloane looked like she was about to be sick. The narrative of the confused old man was crumbling. In its place stood the image of a man who knew exactly who his family was, and liked me better. Judge Vance looked at the blue-bound document on his desk, then back at Rourke. "Mr. Rourke," the judge asked slowly, "given the specificity of these preparations, did Mr. West leave any other documentation? Did he anticipate that his family would stand here today and accuse his caretaker of a felony?" The courtroom went silent again. This was the question. Had Grant West seen the future? Rourke nodded once, a sharp, singular motion. "He did," Rourke said. He reached into the inside pocket of his black suit jacket. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Sloane watched his hand as if he were pulling out a gun. "Mr. West provided us with a supplementary statement," Rourke said. "He instructed that this document was to remain sealed unless, and only unless, his family attempted to challenge the trust or attack the character of Aurora West." Rourke pulled out a single, folded sheet of heavy cream paper. "Since Ms. Carver has just formally accused Ms. West of financial exploitation on the record," Rourke said, his voice dropping a degree cooler, "the condition for unsealing has been met." He walked forward and held the paper out to the judge. "This is the letter he wrote for today," Rourke said. Sloane stepped back, her heel catching on the carpet. She stumbled, grabbing the table for balance. She looked at the paper in the judge's hand with pure terror. It wasn't just a legal document anymore. It was a voice from the grave, and she knew, deep down, that whatever was written on that paper was going to hurt far more than losing the money. Judge Vance took the letter. He unfolded it. The rustle of the paper was the only sound in the room. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. Judge Vance held the single sheet of cream-colored paper in his hands, as if it were a fragile artifact recovered from a shipwreck. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with the low-frequency hum of whispers and shifting bodies just moments ago, fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict, but this felt heavier. It felt like judgment. The judge did not read it aloud immediately. He read it to himself first. I watched his eyes move left to right, line by line. I saw his expression shift from professional scrutiny to something softer, more human, and then finally, to a hardness that made the air around the bench feel cold. He finished the page, paused for a beat, and then looked up. His gaze did not land on me. It landed on the table across the aisle, hitting my parents and my sister with the force of a physical blow. "The document is a notarized affidavit of intent," Judge Vance said, his voice stripped of all bureaucratic fatigue. "It is dated October 14th of last year, and it is addressed to the court having jurisdiction over my estate." He cleared his throat, adjusting the paper under the reading lamp. "I will read the opening paragraph into the record," he announced. Sloane was frozen in her chair, her posture rigid, her chin still held high in a defiance that was rapidly losing its foundation. My mother, Marjorie, had lowered her handkerchief, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, staring at the judge's mouth. Judge Vance began to read. "If you are hearing this in court, it means my son and his family are trying to take my estate by smearing my granddaughter." The words rang out with a brutal clarity. They were simple words, devoid of legal jargon, which made them cut deeper. There was no alleged, no potential, just the plain-spoken truth of a man who knew his own kin. From the gallery behind Sloane, a sound escaped my mother's throat. It was a choked, wet noise, like something breaking inside her chest. This was not the theatrical gasp she had performed earlier for the benefit of the judge. This was real. It was the sound of a woman realizing that her father had seen her, truly seen her, before he died, and he had not liked what he saw. Judge Vance continued, his voice steady. "I am writing this to be absolutely clear about the events of the last year, following my fall in the garden in June. I was the one who called Aurora. I asked her to come. I asked her to stay. She did not force her way into my home. She was the only one who answered the phone when I called on a Sunday afternoon." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden. I remembered that Sunday. I remembered the fear in his voice, not for his injury, but for the loneliness. I remembered driving 3 hours in the rain, terrified I wouldn't get there in time. "My son, Dean, and his wife have claimed they were excluded." The judge read on. "The truth is, they stopped visiting when I stopped writing checks for the Westridge Holdings expansion. They did not call to ask about my health. They called to ask about my signature." Dean West, my father, sat like a statue carved from gray ice. His face was devoid of color. He did not look at the judge. He stared straight ahead at the wood paneling of the wall. His jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. The letter was stripping him naked in public, peeling away the layers of concerned patriarch to reveal the desperate debtor beneath. "I have established the Stonegate Trust for one reason," the letter continued. "I am afraid. I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of the paperwork that comes when a man is too weak to read the fine print. I am afraid of the pressure. I am afraid of the documents brought to my bedside in the dark, by family members who say they love me while handing me a pen." Sloane shifted in her seat, physically recoiling from the words. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the diamond ring on her right hand. "There was an incident in August," the judge read, and his voice hardened. "A mobile notary service was sent to my house at 8 o'clock at night. They claimed to be from the insurance company. They had papers for me to sign. A power of attorney granting control to Sloane Carver. I refused to sign because they would not allow me to call my lawyer, and they refused to wait for an independent witness. When I closed the door, I saw Sloane's car parked at the end of the driveway, waiting with the lights off. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp. It was a low, shocked sound that rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff looked up, his eyebrows raised. This was the twist. This was the knife. It wasn't just greed. It was a conspiracy. Sloane hadn't just waited for him to die. She had actively tried to seize control while he was still alive. Using deception and ambush tactics, she had tried to trick an old man in the dark. Judge Vance lowered the paper slowly. The silence that followed was suffocating. He looked at Sloane. It was a look of pure disgust, thinly veiled by judicial restraint. "Ms. Carver," Judge Vance said softly, "is this true?" Sloane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Trent Holloway, begging for a lifeline, but Trent was staring at the table, distancing himself as fast as he could. He knew that attempted fraud, especially against an elder, was a radioactive accusation for a lawyer to be near. I was just ensuring he had proper representation," Sloane whispered, her voice cracking. "The insurance company, it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding where you waited in the dark at the end of a driveway?" Judge Vance asked. "That sounds less like insurance and more like a heist." He turned his attention to the man in the black suit. "Mr. Rourke." "Mr. Rourke, was this incident reported?" "It was documented in our intake interview." "Your Honor," Rourke replied calmly, "Mr. West provided the license plate number of the notary's vehicle. We have it on file." The thoroughness was terrifying. My grandfather hadn't just been a victim. He had been a detective. He had taken notes. He had prepared for this war while sitting in his armchair, sipping tea, watching them circle like vultures. Judge Vance picked up the original document, the trust notification that Rourke had delivered. He flipped to the back page. "Ms. Carver," the judge said, his voice sharpening. "Mr. Holloway, I have a question regarding the timeline. This trust was funded and finalized before death. The notification was sent to all potential heirs via certified mail yesterday morning." He looked over his glasses. "Did you receive the package from Stonegate Fiduciary yesterday?" Sloane went stiff. She stopped breathing for a second. She started, then stopped. Lying to a judge when the other side held the tracking receipts was perjury. It was a trap. If she admitted she got it. She admitted she knew about the trust and the no contest clause. If she denied it, Rourke would simply produce the delivery signature. "Mr. Holloway?" Judge Vance pivoted to the lawyer. "Did your client inform you that she received a notification of an irrevocable trust yesterday?" Trent Holloway looked like he had swallowed a stone. He stood up slowly. "Your Honor, my office received a package. We were reviewing it. However, the petition for probate was already drafted, and we felt it was necessary to proceed to preserve the status quo while we investigated the validity of the trust. You filed a motion to seize control of assets that you knew were likely already in a trust." Judge Vance corrected him, his voice rising. "And you did this despite the existence of a no contest clause that explicitly forbids such actions. We believe the no contest clause is overly broad," Trent argued weakly. "That is an argument for a hearing," Judge Vance snapped, "but filing an ex parte motion for immediate transfer while concealing the existence of the trust from this court is not a legal argument. It is bad faith. It is an attempt to use this court as a weapon to bypass a legal instrument you did not like." The judge slammed the folder shut. "I will not be signing your transfer order, Mr. Holloway. In fact, I am very close to signing a referral to the state bar." Trent flinched. Marjorie let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. Dean put his arm around her, but he looked defeated, a man watching his burning house collapse. I sat there, staring at the cream-colored letter on the judge's desk. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel the rush of victory that you see in movies. I felt a profound, aching stillness. Grandfather wasn't in the room, but he was. He had written that letter not to hurt them, but to save me. He knew I wouldn't be able to shout them down. He knew I wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer like Trent. He knew Sloane would come at me with her money and her influence and her lies. So he had fought the battle for me, months ago, in the quiet of his study. He had set the trap, dug the trenches, and armed the mines. He didn't want me to have to win. He wanted me to be safe. He wanted to make sure that when the attack came, I didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was wait for the man in black. It was a love letter. It was the most practical, aggressive, protective love letter anyone had ever written. I will not let them hurt you, it said. Even when I am gone, I will stand between you and them. But Judge Vance was not finished. He was not just a referee calling a foul. He was a judge who had been lied to, and his anger was a cold, controlled burn. The petition for probate is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Vance ruled. The assets are property of the Stonegate Trust and are outside the jurisdiction of this probate court. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. However, the behavior I have seen today, the allegations of abuse without evidence, the concealment of the trust document, and the revelation of the predatory behavior detailed in Mr. West's letter raises significant questions about the standing of the petitioners. He looked at Sloane, who was staring at the floor, her face a mask of ruin. I am opening a sua sponte hearing regarding sanctions for frivolous filing and bad faith litigation, Judge Vance announced. I want to know exactly who knew what and when. I want to know why this court was used to harass a beneficiary. He turned to Mr. Rourke. Mr. Rourke, I want the trustee to submit the full logs. I want the video of the signing. I want the intake notes regarding the mobile notary incident. And I want the delivery receipts for the notification packages sent to Ms. Carver and Mr. West. We have them ready, Your Honor, Rourke said. They are in the car. Good, Judge Vance said. File them by noon. He looked back at Trent Holloway. And Mr. Holloway, I suggest you notify your malpractice carrier, because if I find out you knowingly filed a motion to seize trust assets to help your client bypass a forfeiture clause, you are going to need more than just a good explanation. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Vance stood up, gathered his robe, and swept out of the room without a backward glance. The gavel didn't bang. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was loud enough. I remained seated. I put my hand on my chest, feeling my heart beat against my ribs. Across the aisle, the board of directors had dissolved. Sloane was slumped in her chair, looking small and distinctly unwealthy. My parents were arguing in whispers, pointing fingers at each other, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the empty space where the judge had been, seeing only the ghost of an old man who had loved me enough to write a letter that acted like a shield of steel. He had left me money. Yes, but more importantly, he had left me the truth. And in a room full of liars, that was the most expensive thing of all. I took a deep breath. The air no longer smelled like lemon polish and fear. It smelled like rain. It smelled like the end of a storm. But as I stood up to leave, I saw Mr. Rourke waiting by the gate. He wasn't leaving. He was checking his phone, his face grim. He looked up, met my eyes, and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. The courtroom battle was over. But the war had just moved to a new front. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut behind us, cutting off the view of the judge's bench. But the atmosphere in the hallway was even more volatile than the air inside. Inside the courtroom, there were rules. There were bailiffs and a judge and the threat of contempt. Out here in the corridor, with its polished marble floors and echoing acoustics, there were no rules. There was only the raw, ugly wreckage of a family that had finally hit the wall at 100 miles an hour. I walked fast, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the floor. I wanted to get to the elevators. I wanted to get to the parking garage. I wanted to be anywhere that did not smell like Dean and Marjorie West. But they were faster. My mother, Marjorie, did not look like the grieving daughter anymore. The lace handkerchief was gone, stuffed into her purse. Her face was dry and set in a mask of pure, distilled hatred. She moved with a speed I had not seen in years, cutting across my path and forcing me to stop near the water fountains. She leaned in close. She did not yell. Yelling would attract attention, and Marjorie West cared about appearances more than she cared about her own soul. Instead, she whispered, "You destroyed this family," she hissed. The words were wet and sharp, spraying slightly against my cheek. "Are you happy now? You have humiliated your father. You have humiliated your sister. You have torn us apart for a check." I looked at her. I really looked at her. For 34 years, I had looked for my mother in this woman's face. I had looked for softness, for protection, for some sign that she loved me as much as she loved the image of our family. But looking at her now, standing in the fluorescent glare of the courthouse hallway, I realized that the woman I was looking for did not exist. She never had. Marjorie was just a mirror that reflected whatever Dean wanted her to be, and right now, Dean wanted her to be a weapon. I did not destroy anything. "Mother," I said, my voice low and steady, "I just turned on the lights. If the house looks like a ruin, that is because you let it rot." Marjorie recoiled, as if I had slapped her. Her mouth opened to fire back another insult, but she stopped. Her eyes darted over my shoulder. Sloane was coming out of the courtroom. My sister did not look at me. She did not look at our mother. She was walking with her head down, her phone in her hand. She was not crying. She was not screaming. She was tapping furiously on the screen, her thumbs blurring over the glass. There was something frantic about the movement, something that didn't match the defeat she had just suffered. She stopped about 10 feet away from us. She didn't acknowledge my presence. She just finished typing, hit a button with a forceful jab of her thumb, and then immediately flipped the phone face down against her thigh. It was a reflex. It was the move of someone who had just sent a message they did not want anyone to see, not even by accident. It was the move of someone who had just pulled a trigger. "Let's go," a deep voice said beside me. I turned. Mason Klein was standing there. He was the attorney I had hired 2 days ago, on a contingency basis. When I realized the trust fight was going to be messy, I hadn't been able to afford him for the hearing. Mr. Rourke and the trust's lawyers handled the defense of the instrument itself, but Mason was here for the aftermath. He was a sharp-edged man with graying hair and a suit that looked like it had been slept in, but his eyes were alert. He had been waiting in the gallery, watching the slaughter. Mason took my elbow, his grip firm but professional. "Do not say another word to them, Aurora. You are the beneficiary of a contested trust now. Every word you say is potential ammunition for an appeal. Walk." He steered me away from Marjorie, putting his physical body between me and my mother. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. For the first time in my life, I had a barrier. We walked toward the elevators. I could feel Marjorie's eyes burning a hole in my back, but I didn't turn around. I saw Sloane out of the corner of my eye. She was still standing there, clutching her phone against her leg, watching us leave with a gaze that was terrifyingly blank. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was silent. Mason checked his watch. "That went well," he said dryly. "Judge Vance is not known for his patience with fraud. Your grandfather left you a very strong position, Aurora." "It does not feel like a win," I said, leaning against the metal wall of the elevator. "It feels like a funeral." "It was a funeral," Mason said. "You just buried your relationship with them. It is sad, but it is cheaper than letting them steal your future." The doors opened onto the concrete gray of the parking garage. The air was damp and smelled of gasoline and old tires. We walked toward Mason's car, a practical sedan parked near the exit ramp. "I need to get you to the trustee's office," Mason said, unlocking the car. "Rourke wants to do the formal onboarding. Now that the judge has dismissed their petition, the trust is active. You need to set up your accounts, your security protocols, the works." I nodded, reaching for the door handle, and then Mason's pocket buzzed. It wasn't a normal text vibration. It was a rapid, aggressive series of pulses. He frowned, pulling his phone out of his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen, and his casual demeanor evaporated instantly. He stopped walking. "What is it?" I asked, sensing the shift. Mason held up a hand, silencing me. He stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing. "Security alert," he read aloud. "Beneficiary portal, attempt blocked." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means someone just tried to log into your Stonegate profile," Mason said. His voice was tight. "The trust creates a provisional digital profile for beneficiaries the moment the death certificate is filed. It is how you access statements and request distributions. No one is supposed to have the login credentials, but you and the trustee," he tapped the screen, opening the detailed notification. "They did not just try to guess the password," Mason said, looking up at me, his face grim. "They tried to reset the two-factor authentication. They entered the correct social security number, the correct date of birth, and the correct mother's maiden name, and then they tried to change the confirmation phone number to a new device." I felt cold. "My mother's maiden name," I whispered. "Marjorie knows that, obviously." "Get in the car," Mason said, opening the door for me. "Now." He slammed the door shut and jumped into the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he dialed a number on his phone and put it on speaker. "Stonegate Security, this line is recorded." A voice answered instantly. It wasn't a receptionist. It was a flat, synthesized-sounding male voice that sounded like it belonged to a man sitting in a bunker. "This is Mason Klein, legal counsel for beneficiary Aurora West," Mason said, speaking fast. "I have a verified alert on my client's portal. Attempted credential override. We are 2 minutes out of the courtroom. Identity confirmed. Mr. Klein," the voice said. "We see the alert. The attempt occurred 90 seconds ago. Status is blocked." "I need origin details," Mason said. "Who is trying to hijack the account?" There was a brief pause, filled only by the sound of typing on the other end. "The request originated from a mobile device," the security officer said. "An iPhone 15 Pro. The device ID is registered to an Apple ID, Sloane Carver at iCloud.com. I gasped. Sloane. I thought of her in the hallway. The frantic typing, the way she flipped the phone over. She hadn't been texting a friend. She had been launching a cyber attack. She knew the judge had ruled against her. She knew the paper battle was lost. So she had tried to do the one thing she knew how to do better than anyone: steal the keys before the locks could be changed. "She tried to lock me out," I said, my voice trembling. "She tried to change the phone number so I could not get the verification codes. If she got in, she could have transferred the liquid assets out before the trust put the freeze on." "She was trying to drain the operating account," Mason agreed. "She stood 10 feet away from you and tried to rob you." "There is more," the voice on the speaker said. The connection did not come through a standard cellular network. The device was connected to a Wi-Fi network to bypass the courthouse signal jammer. "What network?" Mason asked. "The IP address resolves to a private corporate intranet," the security officer said. "Westridge Holdings, secure executive server." The silence in the car was absolute. "Westridge Holdings, my father's company." "Wait," I said, shaking my head. "Westridge is across town. How could she be on their network?" "VPN," Mason said. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a dark realization. "She was using a virtual private network tunnel. She was routing her phone's traffic through your father's company server. That gave her two things: encryption to hide her location, and the appearance of a trusted corporate device." "Why would she do that?" I asked. "Because Dean gave her the access," Mason said. "That is not a guessed Wi-Fi password. Aurora, to tunnel into the Westridge executive server, you need administrator privileges. You need the master key." I leaned back against the headrest, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. It wasn't just Sloane. I had imagined my father. Dean. As a passive participant, I thought he was just a weak man who let his wife and stepdaughter run the show. I thought he was sitting in that courtroom out of obligation. But I was wrong. Dean wasn't passive. He was the infrastructure. He had given Sloane the digital tools to attack me. He had provided the secure tunnel. He had likely given her the personal data, my social security number, the old passwords, that she needed to bypass the initial security questions. They were a team. Sloane was the hands, and Dean was the brain. "They are not stopping," I said quietly. The judge told them to stop. The law told them to stop, and they walked out into the hallway and immediately tried to break into the bank. "They are desperate," Mason said. "Desperate people do not follow court orders. They follow survival instincts." He turned back to the phone. "Block the portal. I want a full fraud hold on the entire profile. No changes, no transfers, no access. Not even for Aurora West. We will do a manual identity verification in your office in 20 minutes. Until then, lock it down so tight that air cannot get in." "Fraud hold initiated," the voice confirmed. "Account is frozen. We are also logging the intrusion attempt as a violation of the protective covenant. This will be added to the incident report for the sanctions hearing." "Good," Mason said. "And preserve that IP log. We are going to need to prove that Dean West used his company assets to facilitate an attempted theft." "Logs preserved," the voice said. "Good day, Mr. Klein." The line went dead. Mason started the car. The engine purred to life, a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the seat. He put the car in reverse and backed out of the space, his eyes scanning the mirrors. "We are not going home," Mason said. "We are going straight to the trustee, and then we are going to change your phone number, your email, and probably your locks again." I looked out the window as we drove up the ramp. Emerging into the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon, it looked like a beautiful day. The sky was blue, the birds were singing, people were walking their dogs, but I knew the truth. I wasn't living in the normal world anymore. I was living in a siege. "Mason," I said, watching the courthouse disappear in the rearview mirror. "If they used Westridge Holdings Network, that means the company is involved." "Yes," Mason said, merging into traffic. "And Westridge is a public company," I said. "Or at least, they have investors. They have a board." "They do," Mason said. "Using corporate assets to commit felony fraud against a family trust," I said, thinking it through. "That is not just a family problem. That is a corporate governance problem." Mason glanced at me, a small, sharp smile playing on his lips. "You are learning fast, Aurora." "If Dean is using his company to help Sloane steal," I said, "then he is exposing the entire business to liability. If the investors find out..." "If the investors find out," Mason finished for me, "Dean West will not just lose his inheritance, he will lose his CEO chair." He tapped the steering wheel. "But let us not get ahead of ourselves. First, we secure the money. Then, we let the trust lawyers look at those logs. Drew Rourke is going to be very interested to know that a company he might have shares in is being used as a hacking platform." I looked down at my own phone. It was silent. No notifications, no alerts, but it felt heavy in my hand, like a grenade. "She thought she was being clever," I said. "She thought she could hide behind the VPN." "She forgot one thing," Mason said. "Stonegate Fiduciary manages money for people who have enemies much scarier than Sloane Carver. Their cybersecurity is not designed to stop hackers. It is designed to catch them." We turned onto the highway, speeding away from the danger. But I knew the danger wasn't behind us. It was in the cloud. It was in the wires. It was in the desperation of a father and sister who had realized that their lifestyle was about to evaporate, and who were willing to burn everything down, including me, to keep the lights on. "One more thing," Mason said, his voice dropping. "When we get to the office, you are going to have to sign an affidavit." "About what?" "About Dean," Mason said. "You are going to have to formally identify him as a threat to the trust. It means the trustee might move to freeze any assets Westridge has connected to the estate. It is an act of war. Aurora. Once you sign that paper, there is no going back to Sunday dinners." I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Sunday dinners ended 12 years ago. Mason," I said. Give me the pen. Mason nodded. He drove on, his eyes on the road, while I watched the city scroll by, wondering how many other secrets were hiding in the servers of Westridge Holdings. Waiting for us to find them, the man in the black suit had stopped the first wave, but the second wave, the digital wave, had just crashed against the hull, and we were taking on water. Mason, I asked after a moment of silence, if they fail to get the money, what do they do next? Mason didn't answer immediately. He changed lanes, passing a slow-moving truck. When a predator cannot eat, Mason said softly, it does not starve quietly. It attacks the thing that is keeping the food away. They tried the law. They tried the tech. Next, they are going to try the reputation. Get ready. Aurora. They are going to try to make sure that even with all the money in the world, you have nowhere left to go. I stared ahead. Let them try, I said. I have the receipts. Receipts are good, Mason said. But in a PR war, nobody reads the receipts. They only read the headlines. He turned on the radio, drowning out the silence with the low hum of the news. I closed my eyes, preparing myself for the next battle. The courtroom was just the opening ceremony. The real games had just begun. The offices of Stonegate Fiduciary were located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that looked down on the city like a silent, unblinking eye. If the courtroom had been a theater of messy human emotion, this place was a surgical theater. The walls were lined with gray silk. The air was filtered to a crisp, odorless perfection, and the silence was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the server room down the hall. Mason Klein sat next to me at a conference table that was long enough to land a small aircraft on. He pushed a document toward me. Sign here, Mason said, and here, and initial the bottom of page 3. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, made of cold metal. What am I signing? This is a directive of exclusivity, Mason said, tapping the paper. It instructs the trustee that, effective immediately, all communication regarding the estate must go through legal counsel. It legally bars Stonegate from accepting phone calls, emails, or carrier pigeons from your parents or your sister. If they want to talk, they talk to me. If they show up in the lobby, security removes them. You are building a wall. Aurora. And this pen is the mortar, I signed. The scratch of the nib on the paper felt satisfying. With every loop of my signature, I was reclaiming a piece of the piece they had stolen from me. Good, Mason said, sliding the papers into his briefcase. Now, we need to talk to compliance. He tapped the surface of the conference table. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a screen and a camera. The screen flickered to life, and there he was. Drew Rourke, the man in the black suit. He was not in the room with us. He was in another office, perhaps in another city, sitting against a backdrop of white shelves filled with identical black binders. He looked exactly as he had in the courtroom, impassive, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. He was no longer the courier. He was the gatekeeper. Ms. West, Drew said. His voice came through the speakers with high-fidelity clarity, stripped of any static. Mr. Klein, I have reviewed the incident report regarding the unauthorized access attempt. You saw the logs? Mason asked. I did, Drew replied. We have traced the packet data, we have confirmed the device ID, and we have cross-referenced it with the affidavit you just filed regarding the Westridge Holdings network. He looked down at a tablet in his hands, then back at us. It is a clean kill, Drew said. I blinked. I am sorry? A clean kill, Drew repeated, his tone not changing. In compliance terms, it means there is no ambiguity, often, in family disputes. There is a gray area. Someone claims they thought they had permission, or they claim it was an accident. But bypassing a two-factor authentication protocol using a corporate VPN tunnel is not an accident. It is a deliberate, hostile act. He swiped a finger across his tablet. A document appeared on the screen in front of us, mirroring what he was seeing. Most beneficiaries do not read the trust instrument, Drew said. They look at the dollar amount on the first page, and they stop reading. Ms. Carver clearly stopped reading. Show her Clause 9, Mason suggested. Drew nodded. The document on the screen scrolled down to a section highlighted in yellow. Clause 9, Drew read. The no contest provision. We discussed this in court. If a beneficiary challenges the validity of the trust, they forfeit their share. Ms. Carver's motion for immediate transfer this morning was a direct challenge. That was her first strike. But she withdrew the motion, I said. Trent tried to. Intent matters, Drew said. But let us look at what she did 20 minutes ago. Clause 12, Section B. The screen scrolled again. The Digital Integrity Clause, Drew said. Any attempt by a beneficiary to access, alter, or manipulate the administrative portals of the trust through unauthorized means, including but not limited to credential sharing, hacking, or impersonation, shall be considered a hostile action equivalent to a legal contest. I stared at the words. My grandfather had thought of everything. He knew Sloane lived on her phone. He knew she thought passwords were just suggestions. So, I said slowly, by trying to log in as me, she triggered the forfeiture clause a second time, Drew finished. Even if the judge decides to be lenient about the court filing, the cyber intrusion is black and white. She tried to breach the vault recognized her, and the vault locked her out. But here's the part she really should have read, Mason said, leaning forward. Scroll down to the reimbursement trigger. Drew, the screen moved to a section I had never seen before. Clause 14. Reimbursement of defense costs, Drew read. In the event that the trustee is required to defend the integrity of this trust against any action, legal or extra-legal, initiated by a family member, the costs of said defense shall not be drawn from the general principle. He paused, looking directly at me through the camera. The costs shall be deducted directly from the share of the allocated inheritance of the attacking party. My mouth fell open slightly. Wait, I said. You mean? I mean, Mason said, a shark-like grin spreading across his face, that every hour I bill, and every hour Mr. Rourke bills, and every hour the forensic cyber team bills to investigate this hack, it does not come out of your money, Aurora. It comes out of Sloane's. Assuming she has any share left to take from, Drew corrected efficiently. If she is fully disinherited, it becomes a debt she owes to the estate. We can place a lien on her personal assets to recover the legal fees. I sat back in the leather chair. It was brilliant. It was vicious. It was perfect. Sloane was currently paying for her own destruction. Every time she called her lawyer, every time she filed a motion, every time she tried to hack a password, she was literally burning her own inheritance to pay for the people who were stopping her. She is digging a hole, I whispered. And she is paying for the shovel. Expensive shovels, Mason noted. Stonegate's forensic rates are not cheap. Drew Rourke did not smile, but his eyes seemed to brighten slightly, as if he enjoyed the efficiency of the trap. There is one more thing you need to be aware of. Ms. West, Drew said, please look at the organizational chart on page 2. The screen shifted again. I saw a diagram of the trust structure. At the top was the Grant West Irrevocable Trust. Below that was Stonegate Fiduciary as the trustee, and below that were the beneficiaries. But there was a line connecting the trustee to a box I hadn't noticed before. The box was labeled Trust Liaison, and inside the box, typed in clear, bold letters, was my name, Aurora West. What is this? I asked. Your grandfather did not just want you to be a passive recipient of a check, Drew said. He knew the dynamics of your family. He knew that a corporate trustee, while efficient, cannot see everything. We are in an office tower. We do not know if your father is selling the furniture. We do not know if your sister is harassing you at the grocery store. He leaned closer to the camera. So he created a job for you. You are the trust liaison. You are the eyes and ears on the ground. I have a job? I asked, stunned. You have authority, Drew corrected. As liaison, you have the unilateral power to request emergency protective measures. If you report that a family member is harassing you, or threatening the estate, or behaving in a way that violates the spirit of the trust, you can trigger Clause 17. Clause 17? I asked. I feel like I am learning a new language. Clause 17 is the suspension of benefits, Drew said. Upon the report of the liaison, the trustee has the discretion to immediately suspend all distributions to the offending party until an investigation is complete. It turns off the tap, instantly. I remembered the hallway, Marjorie's whisper, "You destroyed this family," Sloane's frantic typing. I realized then that my grandfather hadn't just left me money. He had left me a weapon. He knew they would come for me. He knew they would try to bully me, just like they had bullied him. So he had given me the one thing they respected, the power to cut them off. He told me once, I said, my voice quiet. He said, "Aurora, you do not need to shout to be heard. You just need to follow the procedure. The loud man loses to the man with the checklist." He was a wise man, Drew said, and he liked checklists. Mason pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. "I am sending the logs to the court clerk right now," Mason said. "Attached to a supplemental declaration, I am time-stamping it to show that the intrusion attempt happened exactly 90 seconds after the judge left the bench." "What will the judge do?" I asked. "He will see it for what it is," Mason said. "Contempt, bad faith, and proof that the protective order he is about to sign needs to be ironclad." "We do not argue with them," Drew said. And for the first time, his voice sounded almost human, almost protective. That is the mistake people make in these situations. They try to argue with narcissists. They try to explain. They try to justify. He shook his head. "We do not argue. We record every text message they send you, every voicemail, every attempt to log in, every time they drive past your house. You report it to me. I log it, and then we apply the clauses." "Sloane thinks she is fighting a family feud," I said, the realization washing over me. "She thinks if she screams loud enough, I will give up." "She is not fighting a feud," Drew said. "She is fighting an algorithm, and the algorithm is set to protect Aurora West." I looked at the screen, at the diagram with my name in the box. Trust liaison. For years, I had been the invisible daughter, the one who didn't matter, the one who was too soft or too sensitive. My parents had looked right through me to get to Sloane. Sloane had looked down on me from her pedestal of borrowed money, but grandfather had seen me. He had seen that my quietness wasn't weakness, it was patience, and he had built this entire structure, this fortress of paper and laws, to reward that patience. "So," I said, sitting up straighter, "if Dean used the Westridge network, does that count as harassment?" "It counts as unauthorized use of corporate assets to facilitate a fraud," Drew said. "And as liaison, you have the right to request that we investigate whether Westridge Holdings, which is partially an asset of the trust, is being mismanaged." Mason laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. "She has got it. Drew, she understands the leverage." "Excellent," Drew said. "I will prepare the letters. We will notify Westridge Holdings that their network was used in a hostile action against a shareholder's estate. That should make your father's next board meeting lively." I looked at the pen in my hand. It was just a pen, but in this room, with these rules, it was heavier than a sword. "Do it," I said. "Send the letter." "Recorded," Drew said, as the screen faded to black, ending the call. I looked at Mason. "Sloane does not know about the reimbursement trigger yet, does she?" I asked. "No," Mason said. "She probably has not read that far." "She is going to find out," I said. "When she gets the bill for your time today, I will make sure to itemize it," Mason said, closing his briefcase. "Detailed descriptions. Conference regarding attempted cyber theft by beneficiary. That should look nice on the invoice." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, in a frantic office or a luxury car. Sloane was panicking. She was trying to spin a story. She was trying to blame me. She was trying to rally the troops, but she didn't realize that she had already lost. She had lost the moment she decided to play a game she didn't understand. Against a man who had spent 90 years learning the rules, and a granddaughter who had finally decided to enforce them. She was building a case against herself. Brick by brick, text by text, login by login. And all I had to do was watch. The sanctions hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, 3 days after the initial disaster in Judge Vance's courtroom. The atmosphere in the hallway was different this time. The shock of the surprise trust had worn off, replaced by a grim, trench warfare tension. I stood near the metal detectors with Mason, watching my family arrive. Dean West walked in first. He looked infuriatingly calm. He was wearing a fresh charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, walking with the chest-out strut of a man who believes he is too important to fail. He was whispering something to Marjorie, who was nodding rapidly, clutching her purse like a shield. Behind them trailed Sloane and Trent Holloway. Sloane looked tired. Her makeup was a little heavier than usual, hiding the dark circles, but she still held her head high. Trent looked like a man walking to his own execution, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "Look at him," Mason murmured to me, nodding toward my father. "He is walking like he owns the building. That is the walk of a man who thinks he can write a check to make this go away." "He usually can," I said. "Dean believes there is no problem that cannot be solved by throwing money at it." "Well," Mason said, adjusting his tie, "he is about to find out that Judge Vance does not accept tips." We watched as they huddled near the entrance to courtroom 4B. Dean was gesturing, looking authoritative. He was probably telling them to stick to the script. It was a misunderstanding. We were just concerned for the estate. We acted out of love, but then the ecosystem of the hallway changed. A man in a beige windbreaker and nondescript slacks stepped off the elevator. He didn't look like a lawyer. He didn't look like a client. He carried a distinct air of bureaucratic inevitability. He scanned the hallway, holding a thin stack of papers, and his eyes locked onto my father. He walked straight through the cluster of people. He didn't say, "Excuse me." "Dean West?" the man asked. My father turned, annoyed at the interruption. He looked the man up and down, dismissing him instantly as someone of lower status. "I am in a conference with my counsel. Step away." The man didn't step away. He stepped closer. He extended his hand, not to shake, but to thrust the papers against Dean's chest. "Dean West, you are served," the man said. His voice was flat, bored. "Courtesy of the State Department of Financial Investigation." Dean flinched, instinctively grabbing the papers before they fell to the floor. "What is this? Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," the man said, already turning to leave. "You have 20 days to respond. Have a nice day." Dean looked down at the documents. I saw the blood drain from his face in real time. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. 1 second he was flushed with arrogance, and the next he was the color of old parchment. Marjorie leaned in. "Dean, what is it? Is it about the trust?" Dean didn't answer. His hands were shaking. Mason, who had the eyes of a hawk, nudged me. "Aurora, look at the header. That is not a probate court filing. That is a state seal. And that blue cover sheet? That usually means a subpoena for financial records regarding corporate malfeasance." Dean hissed something at Trent Holloway. Trent looked at the paper, and for a moment, I thought the lawyer was going to faint. He took a half step back from Dean, as if my father had suddenly become contagious. "It is not about the trust," I realized, my voice a whisper. "It is about Westridge." Sloane snatched the papers from her father's hand. She read the cover page, her eyes darting back and forth. Then she looked up, and her expression wasn't one of concern for her father. It was the look of a rat realizing the ship was taking on water. She dropped the papers back onto Dean's chest and took a step away from him. "You said you handled it," Sloane whispered harshly. The hallway acoustics carried her voice right to us. "You said the audit was clean." "Shut up," Dean snapped, his voice cracking. "Not here." Mason grabbed my arm and pulled me slightly closer, lowering his voice. "I see it now. I see the whole picture." "What do you see?" I asked. "Why were they so desperate for an immediate transfer of your grandfather's assets?" Mason asked rapidly. "Why did they file an emergency motion? Why did they try to hack the account the second the judge said no? Why the rush? Probate usually takes months. Why did they need control today?" I looked at my father, who was now sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Because they are broke," I said. "Worse," Mason said. "They are underwater. Look at the accusation on that summons." I caught a glimpse of the bold text. Falsification of corporate assets, signature irregularities. Mason's mind was working like a supercomputer. Dean has been cooking the books at Westridge Holdings. He has been hiding losses. Maybe he borrowed against the company accounts to fund their lifestyle. Or maybe the business is just failing. Either way, the regulators found out. He needs a massive infusion of cash to plug the hole before the investigation goes criminal. "He needed grandfather's money," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "He wasn't trying to steal the inheritance just to be greedy. He was trying to steal it to stay out of prison. And he needed it fast," Mason said. "That is why they were so sloppy. That is why they risked the no contest clause. They were not thinking about the future. They were trying to survive the week." The doors to courtroom 4B opened. The bailiff stuck his head out. "Case number 492. Estate of West. All parties present?" Dean looked like he wanted to run. He looked at the elevator, then at the courtroom door. He was trapped. If he ran, he looked guilty. If he went in, he was walking into a buzzsaw. He straightened his jacket, but the swagger was gone. He looked like a man made of glass who was about to be hit with a hammer. We walked in. Judge Vance was already on the bench. He looked less patient than he had 3 days ago. He had a stack of papers in front of him, the logs Drew and Mason had submitted. "We are here on the court's motion regarding sanctions," Judge Vance said, skipping the pleasantries. "Mr. Holloway, before we begin, I have reviewed the supplemental filings regarding the digital intrusion attempt that occurred immediately after our last recess." Trent Holloway stood up. He looked ill. "Your Honor, I have spoken to my client." "I'm sure you have," Judge Vance interrupted. "But before we get to the hacking, I have a question about your standing." The judge picked up a piece of paper. "It has come to the court's attention, through a review of public records, that your firm, Holloway and Associates, is also the retained counsel for Westridge Holdings, Inc." Trent froze. We handle some corporate matters for the entity, yes. And Westridge Holdings is an asset that was partially held by the decedent, Grant West?" "Yes, Your Honor. And your client today, Ms. Sloane Carver, is an executive at Westridge Holdings?" "She is the Vice President of Operations," Trent admitted. "And Mr. Dean West, who is sitting in the gallery, is the CEO?" "Yes." Judge Vance took off his glasses. "So, let me understand this. You represent the company, you represent the CEO, and you represent the beneficiary who is trying to seize control of the shares of that company. Mr. Holloway, if the company is in financial distress and the beneficiary wants to use the estate's assets to bail out the company, do you not see a conflict of interest the size of Montana?" Trent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "It gets worse," Judge Vance said, "because if there is an active investigation into Westridge Holdings, which, judging by the process server I just saw on the security feed in the hallway, there seems to be, then you are potentially using this probate court to facilitate a money laundering scheme." The silence in the room was absolute. I was not aware of any investigation," Trent stammered. "Ignorance is not a defense when you are dual-hatting as corporate and personal counsel," Judge Vance snapped. "I am submitting a referral to the State Bar for a conflict review. You are skating on very thin ice, Counselor." The judge turned his gaze to Sloane. Ms. Carver. The logs provided by the trustee show that you attempted to bypass security using a device registered to you. Do you deny this? Sloane stood up. She looked at Trent, saw he was useless, and decided to go rogue again. But this time, her voice was shaking. I was just checking the balance, she said. I wanted to know if the funds were safe. You tried to change the phone number, Judge Vance said. That is not checking a balance. That is changing the locks. He wrote something down on the docket. I am issuing a temporary restraining order, Judge Vance announced. Dean West, Marjorie West, and Sloane Carver are hereby enjoined from accessing, attempting to access, or contacting any financial institution connected to the Grant West Trust. Any further attempts will be considered a violation of a court order and will result in immediate incarceration. He looked at Dean and Mr. West regarding the Westridge Holdings shares held by the trust. I am granting the trustee's request to appoint a special independent auditor to review the value of those shares. If the company is being investigated, the trust needs to know if its assets are being devalued by your management. Dean closed his eyes. That was the death blow. An independent auditor meant strangers looking at the books. It meant the end of the shell game. Hearing adjourned, Judge Vance said. As we walked out, the dynamic had completely shifted. They weren't attacking me anymore. They were eating each other. Marjorie was crying openly now, gripping Dean's arm. You said it was handled. Dean, you said if we got the inheritance, we could pay off the loan before the regulators saw it. Be quiet, Dean hissed, shoving her hand away. Not here. Sloane was walking fast. Trying to get away from them, she saw me standing by the water fountain with Mason. She stopped. For a second, the mask dropped completely. She looked at me with a terrified, naked vulnerability. She wasn't the quiet luxury queen anymore. She was a scared little sister who knew the roof was caving in. Aurora, she said. Her voice was soft. Aurora, please, can we just talk? Without the lawyers? Just sisters? I looked at her, a part of me, the part that remembered playing dress-up in the attic, the part that remembered when we were on the same team against the world, wanted to say yes. She looked so small, but then I remembered the mobile notary in the driveway. I remembered the text message to the bank. I remembered the look on her face when she thought she had won. Before I could answer, Mason stepped in front of me. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. My client has nothing to say to you, Ms. Carver, Mason said. You have the directive. All communication goes through my office. This is my sister, Sloane cried out, tears finally spilling over. This is family. You cannot legislate family. You can when the family is a criminal enterprise, Mason said coldly. Move along. Sloane looked at me one last time, begging with her eyes. Save me. Fix this. I didn't look away. I just didn't answer. I let the silence stretch out until she realized that the bridge wasn't just burned. It was demolished. She turned and ran toward the exit, her heels clacking frantically on the marble. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a secure message from the Stonegate app. Drew Rourke. I opened the file attached to the message. It was a single image, a digital forensic log. Subject: Unauthorized Access Attempt 003. Source: Desktop Workstation, Terminal 4. Location: Westridge Holdings, CEO Office Suite. Time: 2:05 p.m. Current: I showed the phone to Mason. Look at the timestamp, I said. 2:05 p.m. That was 10 minutes ago, Mason said. While we were in the courtroom. Dean was in the courtroom, I said. Sloane was in the courtroom. Marjorie was in the courtroom. Then who was in the CEO's office trying to log into your account? Mason asked. I stared at the screen. Someone else is involved. Someone at the company who Dean trusts with his passwords. Or, Mason said, his eyes darkening. Dean set up an automated bot to keep trying to crack the account even while he was in court, to create an alibi. No, I said, reading the metadata Drew had highlighted. It wasn't a bot. It was a manual entry. Someone typed it. Someone is in his office right now. I looked back at the courtroom door where Dean was still arguing with Trent. They are not just a family, I whispered. They are a syndicate, and they have a mole left at the headquarters. Mason pulled out his phone. I am calling Drew. We need to freeze the Westridge corporate accounts. If someone is in that office, they might be shredding documents right now. I watched my father across the hall. He looked desperate. Yes, but he also looked confused. He was checking his phone, frowning. He didn't know who was in his office either. And that was the scariest part. The rats were not just leaving the ship. They were starting to steal the lifeboats from each other. Let's go, I said to Mason. Before they delete the evidence, we headed for the exit, leaving the West family to drown in the rising tide of their own making. But as we walked into the sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the person sitting at that computer terminal wasn't trying to steal money for Dean. They were trying to steal it from him. The hearing for sanctions was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday. The courtroom was the same wood-paneled box where the war had started earlier in the week. But the atmosphere had undergone a radical shift. On Tuesday, the air had been thick with my family's arrogance, a suffocating perfume of entitlement and expensive cologne. Today, the air smelled like antiseptic and fear. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Mason Klein. Mason looked relaxed, flipping through a thick binder of exhibits with the casual confidence of a man holding a royal flush. Across the aisle, the defense table looked like a triage unit. Trent Holloway, the lawyer who had strutted into the first hearing with a smile that cost more than my car, was a shadow of himself. His suit was still impeccable, but he wore it differently. His shoulders were slumped, his tie was perhaps a millimeter off-center, and his face had the gray, pasty complexion of a man who had not slept in 48 hours. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at me. He stared at the stack of papers in front of him as if they were a bear trap that would snap his hand off if he touched them, beside him. Sloane sat perfectly still. She was wearing black, a strategic choice meant to evoke sympathy or perhaps solemnity, but under the harsh fluorescent lights, it just made her look washed out. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her fingers looked like wax. My parents, Dean and Marjorie, sat in the front row of the gallery. They were no longer the synchronized nodding chorus. Dean sat with his arms crossed, staring at a spot on the floor, his jaw set in a rigid line. Marjorie was trembling, clutching her handbag with both hands, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Vance swept into the room. He did not look at the docket. He did not ask for opening statements. He sat down, arranged his robe, and looked directly at Trent Holloway. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Vance said. His voice was not loud. It was conversational, which made it terrifying. "I have spent the last evening reviewing the timeline of events submitted by the trustee and authenticated by the court clerk. I want to make sure I understand the sequence. Correct me if I'm wrong." Trent stood up. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not," Judge Vance said pleasantly. "You may listen." The judge picked up a single sheet of paper. "On Monday morning, your client received a certified package notifying her of the existence of the Grant West Irrevocable Trust and its terms, including the no contest clause. We have the delivery receipt signed by her doorman and a time-stamped photo of the package on her entry table." He lowered the paper and picked up another. "On Tuesday morning, despite possessing this knowledge, you filed an emergency ex parte motion to transfer all assets to your client, claiming there was no estate plan in place. You stood in my courtroom and told me there was an immediate need to prevent dissipation." Trent shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Your Honor, as I stated, there was confusion regarding the validity." "On Tuesday mid-morning," Judge Vance continued, ignoring him completely, "when the trustee appeared and produced the documents, your client pivoted to an accusation of financial exploitation against the beneficiary, Aurora West, an accusation made without a police report, without medical evidence, and without a sworn affidavit." The judge paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. And then, Judge Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, on Tuesday afternoon, exactly 90 seconds after this court went into recess, an attempt was made to breach the secure beneficiary portal of the trust. He looked over his reading glasses at Sloane. This attempt involved the use of a virtual private network associated with Westridge Holdings, the falsification of identity verification questions, and an attempt to change the two-factor authentication phone number to a device registered to Sloane Carver. Sloane flinched. It was a small movement, a slight jerk of her head, but in the stillness of the room, it was a confession. Judge Vance turned to the man sitting at the end of my table. Drew Rourke was there, dressed in his signature black suit, looking as immutable as a slab of granite. "Mr. Rourke," the judge said, "you have submitted a declaration regarding this digital intrusion?" Drew stood up. "I have, Your Honor." "Please summarize the findings for the record," Judge Vance said. Drew did not need notes. He spoke with the precision of a machine. At 2:05 in the afternoon on Tuesday, the Stonegate security protocol flagged a login attempt. The user successfully answered the challenge questions regarding social security number and mother's maiden name. The user then attempted to bypass the SMS verification by requesting a reset to a new mobile number. Our system blocked the request because the IP address did not match the geolocation of the beneficiary. Drew turned his head slightly, directing his voice toward Trent Holloway. The IP address was traced to the internal executive network of Westridge Holdings. The device MAC address corresponds to an iPhone 15 Pro, which is the same device Ms. Carver used to sign her electronic retainer agreement with your firm. Mr. Holloway, the digital fingerprint is identical. It was a devastating sequence of facts. There was no emotion in it, just data. It stripped away any possibility of, it was a hacker, or it was a mistake. It was a fingerprint on a smoking gun. Trent Holloway closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. He looked like a man who knew he was about to be fired, sued, or disbarred, possibly all three by lunchtime. "Your Honor," Trent said, his voice weak, "in light of recent revelations, we would like to withdraw our motion for immediate transfer. We also withdraw the statements made regarding financial exploitation. We ask the court to dismiss the current petitions without prejudice." It was a surrender. He was trying to stop the bleeding. He wanted to pack up his briefcase and run out of the room before the damage became permanent. Judge Vance looked at him with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Mr. Holloway," the judge said slowly, "you seem to be under a misapprehension. You can withdraw a motion. You can withdraw a petition, but you cannot withdraw consequences." The judge leaned forward, clasping his hands on the bench. "You used this court as a weapon. You filed a frivolous motion to seize assets you knew were protected. You allowed your client to perjure herself regarding the receipt of the trust documents. And then, while under the jurisdiction of this court, your client attempted to commit grand larceny via wire fraud." He shook his head. "We are past the point of withdrawal. We are now at the point of reckoning." Judge Vance picked up his gavel, not to strike it, but to hold it, weighing it in his hand. "I am issuing the following orders," the judge announced. "First, the court finds that Sloane Carver has acted in bad faith. As such, under the reimbursement trigger clause of the trust, which I am upholding as valid, Miss Carver is ordered to pay the entirety of the legal fees incurred by Aurora West and the trustee in defending this action. Mr. Klein, submit your bill." Mason nodded beside me. "We will have it to the clerk by noon, Your Honor." "Second," Judge Vance continued, "I am issuing a permanent protective order. Sloane Carver, Dean West, and Marjorie West are enjoined from contacting any financial institution, bank, brokerage, or third-party custodian holding assets of the Grant West Trust. You are forbidden from contacting the trustee directly. You are forbidden from accessing any digital portal related to the estate." Sloane let out a shaky breath. This was a restraining order, but for money, it meant she was radioactive to the banks. "And third," Judge Vance said, and this was the blow I had been waiting for, "I am directing the court clerk to forward the transcript of this hearing. along with the digital forensic logs provided by Mr. Rourke, to the licensing board of the State Financial Regulatory Commission. Sloane's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, filled with a sudden, absolute terror that she had not shown before. "Your Honor!" Trent shouted, forgetting himself. "That is excessive. My client is a licensed fiduciary. She runs the Carver Family Fund. A referral like that effectively suspends her license pending investigation. It will destroy her career." "She should have thought about her career before she tried to hack a trust fund from her father's office," Judge Vance snapped. "This court relies on the integrity of financial professionals. Ms. Carver has demonstrated that she has none. If she is managing other people's money, the state needs to know that she is capable of trying to steal from her own grandfather." It was the kill shot. Sloane wasn't just losing the inheritance, she was losing her identity. Her entire brand was built on quiet luxury and trust. She was the face of ethical wealth management. A fraud investigation by the state board would turn her into a pariah. No one would trust her with $1, let alone a portfolio. Behind me. Marjorie made a sound. It wasn't a sob of grief. It was a high-pitched whine of panic. "Dean," Marjorie whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "The board. If Sloane is investigated, they will look at Westridge. They will look at the connection." Dean West did not move. He sat like a stone statue. He was not looking at Sloane. He was not looking at Marjorie. He was staring straight ahead. His eyes glazed over. He was doing the math. He realized that the firewall had breached. Sloane's recklessness had just invited the regulators right into his living room. His silence wasn't shock. It was the cold, hard silence of a man calculating who he had to sacrifice to save himself. Judge Vance turned his eyes to me. "Ms. West," the judge said. His tone softened significantly. "You have been very quiet throughout these proceedings. Is there anything you wish to add before I close the record?" I stood up. I didn't smooth my skirt. I didn't check my hair. I just stood there, feeling the weight of the room, the weight of the last 3 days, and the weight of the last 30 years. I looked at Sloane. She was looking at me, tears streaming down her face, her makeup ruined. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting to be punished. But I felt no satisfaction. I didn't feel happy. I just felt tired. "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady, low, and clear. "I do not have a speech. I just want to execute the trust exactly as my grandfather wrote it. He wanted peace. If this is what it takes to get peace, then so be it." I sat down. Judge Vance nodded. It was a nod of respect. "The court rewards records," Judge Vance said, looking one last time at Trent Holloway and his crumbling defense. "It does not reward confidence. It does not reward volume. And it certainly does not reward the belief that you are above the rules." He banged the gavel. It was a sharp, final sound that echoed like a gunshot. "We are adjourned." The room erupted into movement. The bailiff moved to open the doors. Trent Holloway began shoving papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements, desperate to escape his client. But I stayed seated for a moment. I watched my family. Marjorie was weeping openly now, clutching Dean's lapel. "Dean, do something! Speak to the judge!" Dean stood up, brushed her hand off his suit, and buttoned his jacket. He looked at Sloane. "You are on your own," Dean said. His voice was cold, devoid of any fatherly warmth. "Do not call the office. Do not come to the house. You have brought the auditors to my door." "Sloane, I am not going to let you drag me down with you." Sloane gasped, reeling back as if he had punched her. "Dad? But you gave me the password. You told me to do it." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Dean said, "and neither will my lawyers." He turned and walked out of the courtroom. Leaving his wife and stepdaughter standing in the wreckage, Mason leaned over to me. "And there it is," he whispered. "The cannibalism begins." "He is cutting her loose," I said, watching Sloane stand there, abandoned and trembling. "He thinks if he sacrifices her, The investigators will stop." "He is wrong," Drew Rourke said. I hadn't heard him approach. Drew was standing at the edge of the table, his face as unreadable as ever. He was holding his phone. "I just received a confirmation," Drew said. "The special auditor appointed by the judge has already arrived at Westridge Holdings. They are locking the server room as we speak." I looked at Drew, then at Sloane, who was now sobbing into her hands while Trent Holloway tried to edge away from her. "She lost everything," I said quietly. "The money, her job, her father. She made her choices," Drew said. "She bet against the house, and she bet with counterfeit chips." "Come on, Aurora," Mason said, gathering his files. "We have paperwork to file, and I believe you owe me a very expensive lunch." I stood up. I walked past the defense table. Sloane didn't look up. She was curled in on herself, a small black shape in a large, empty room. I hesitated for a second. The sister in me wanted to reach out. The sister in me wanted to say I was sorry it had to be this way, but then I remembered the letter. "If you are hearing this, it means they are trying to smear you." I kept walking. I walked out of the courtroom, past the weeping Marjorie, past the fleeing Dean, and into the hallway. The air out here was still cool, still indifferent. I had won. The judge had given me everything I asked for, but as I walked toward the elevators, I realized that the real victory wasn't the court order. The real victory was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They were just people, flawed, greedy, desperate people who had run out of road, and I was the one holding the map. "What happens now?" I asked Mason as we pressed the elevator button. "Now?" Mason smiled. A genuine smile this time. "Now we sit back and watch them try to swim with the sharks they invited to the pool. And you, Aurora, you go home and finally get some sleep." The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of courtroom 4B, I let out a long breath. It was over, or at least, the legal part was over, but I knew my family. Dean wouldn't go down quietly. He had abandoned Sloane, which meant he was desperate, and a desperate man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. I checked my phone, no new alerts. The silence was beautiful, but I knew it wouldn't last. "Mason," I said as the elevator descended, "keep the fraud hold on, just in case." "Way ahead of you," Mason said. "I never take the safety off until the gun is back in the holster." We walked out into the day, leaving the ruins of the West family behind us, locked in a room with a judge who rewarded records, and a record that would never, ever be erased. The weekend passed in a strange, suspended silence. It was the kind of quiet that falls over a battlefield when both sides are reloading. But on Monday morning, the ceasefire ended. It did not end with a bang, but with a ping. I was sitting in Mason Klein's office, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt hazelnuts. When an email landed in his inbox, Mason turned his monitor so I could see it. The subject line read, "Proposed Family Settlement Agreement. Confidential." "They are trying to pivot," Mason said, leaning back in his chair. "Sloane realizes the judge is going to crush her in the sanctions hearing, so she is trying to bypass the court entirely." I read the document attached. It was drafted in soft, conciliatory language. It spoke of healing family wounds and avoiding public spectacle. It proposed that we set aside the trust, pool the assets into a shared family, LLC, and divide the management rights equally between Sloane, Dean, and myself. It was an offer to call a truce. "It sounds reasonable," I said, testing the word. "To an outsider, it sounds like she is trying to be fair." Mason laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "It is a trap. Aurora, it is a poison pill wrapped in cheese." He pointed to a clause on the third page. "Look at this. Mutual release of all claims. If you sign this, you waive your right to enforce the trust. You waive the fraud allegations. You waive the reimbursement of legal fees. You basically tell the world that the trust was never valid. But if it stops the fighting," I started. It does not stop the fighting, Mason corrected. It just moves the fight to a cage where they have the advantage. If you agree to dissolve the trust and create an LLC, who do you think will run that LLC? Dean and Sloane. They will outvote you 2-1 on every decision. Within 6 months, they will have drained the accounts for management fees and consulting bonuses, and you will be left with 1/3 of nothing. He tapped the screen. But there is a bigger problem. The trust has an anti-duress clause. If you sign a settlement that alters the distribution of assets while there is pending litigation, the trustee is legally required to assume you are being coerced. Stonegate would step in and block the settlement anyway. Signing this is legal suicide. So she knows this? I asked. Or is she just hoping I'm stupid? She is hoping you are tired, Mason said. She is betting that you want your family back more than you want the money. She is testing your resolve. Tell her no, I said. Tell her the trust stands. Mason sent the rejection. It was a 1-line email. Client adheres to the terms of the Grant West Irrevocable Trust. No settlement offers will be entertained. Sloane's reaction was immediate. She didn't call. She didn't text. She tried to change the map. 2 hours later, Mason's phone rang. It was Drew Rourke. We have a situation, Drew said, his voice coming through the speakerphone with its usual robotic calm. Ms. Carver has just filed a new petition, but she did not file it in Judge Vance's court. Where did she go? Mason asked, already typing on his keyboard. She filed in Lake County, Drew said, where the vacation property is located. She is petitioning for a quiet title action, claiming that the transfer of the lake house into the trust was fraudulent. She is trying to strip the real estate out of the main estate. She is venue shopping, Mason said, shaking his head. She knows Vance hates her, so she is trying to find a judge in the countryside who might be more sympathetic to a crying granddaughter. It is a desperate move, Drew said. And it is also a mistake. Why? I asked. Because your grandfather hated ambiguity, Drew said. Turn to Section 22 of your copy of the trust. I flipped through the heavy binder Mason had given me. Section 22, Forum Selection and Exclusive Jurisdiction. Grant West designated the Central Probate Court of this county as the sole and exclusive venue for any dispute regarding the trust, Drew explained. He wrote it into the deed. He wrote it into the trust instrument, and he added a self-executing removal clause. Which means? I asked. Which means, Mason said, grinning, that the judge in Lake County does not even have the authority to open the file. As soon as he sees this clause, he has to dismiss the case and send it back to Judge Vance. But it buys her time, I said. It creates confusion. No, Drew said. It creates consequences. I am sending you a document I just unsealed. It is an internal instruction memo from Grant West to the trustee. A new file appeared in my email. I opened it. It was dated 6 months ago. The header read, Directives regarding litigation and asset freezing. I read the highlighted paragraph. In the event that any beneficiary attempts to file suit in a jurisdiction other than the designated venue, or attempts to segregate assets through quiet title actions, the trustee is instructed to immediately freeze all discretionary distributions to all beneficiaries until such action is dismissed with prejudice. He locked the doors, I whispered. He did more than that, Drew said. He rigged the building to lockdown, because Sloane filed that petition in Lake County. I am now legally required to freeze the entire estate. No bills get paid, no allowances go out, nothing moves until she drops the case. She just cut off her own supply line, Mason said. If she was hoping to get a quick settlement to pay her lawyers, she just ensured that not a single penny leaves Stonegate until she surrenders. We will file the motion to dismiss for improper venue within the hour, Drew said. But Aurora, you should know something else. We found a physical note attached to the deed of the lake house. It is handwritten. I am having a courier bring the original to you. But I will read it. There was a pause. For the first time, Drew sounded slightly less like a machine. It says, Aurora. They will try to take the house first. It is the only thing they care about because it is the only thing their friends can see. Do not let them. The house is not a status symbol. It is where we went fishing. Keep the memories. Let them fight the paper. I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked out the window of the high-rise office. I could almost see the lake house, hours away, sitting by the water. Sloane wanted it for the parties. She wanted it so she could post photos on Instagram of sunset at the family estate. Grandfather knew that. He knew she saw it as a backdrop, not a home. Let them fight the paper, I repeated. Thank you. Drew, the call ended. Mason looked at me. She is running out of moves, Aurora, and she is running out of money. That afternoon, the pressure on the West family began to crack the foundation. The investigation into Westridge Holdings wasn't just a threat anymore. It was an active operation. Mason received a courtesy copy of a subpoena that had been served on Dean. It wasn't from the probate court. It was from the State Financial Crimes Division. They were demanding the release of 5 years of corporate ledgers, specifically those relating to executive loans and asset leverage. Dean is finished, Mason said, looking at the document. They are looking for the loan he took out to pay for Sloane's wedding and the loan he took out to cover the losses from his failed expansion into crypto. He used company stock as collateral without board approval. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, I said. And now Peter is asking for his money back. And he can't use your inheritance to pay it back, Mason said, because Sloane froze it by suing in the wrong county. The irony is almost poetic. The stress was doing what stress always does to weak alliances. It was breaking them apart. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a blocked number. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. Mom. I hadn't spoken to her since she hissed at me in the hallway. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button. A text message popped up. Aurora, please, I am at the coffee shop near your apartment. Just 5 minutes. No lawyers. Just mother and daughter. Dad is losing his mind. I need to talk to someone who is sane. I read it twice. Dad is losing his mind. It was a plea for help. It was Marjorie realizing that the ship was going down and trying to find a lifeboat. Don't do it, Mason said softly. He hadn't seen the screen. But he knew. She says she wants to talk. Just mother and daughter, I said. There is no such thing anymore, Mason said. If you go there, she will cry. She will tell you that your father is suicidal. She will tell you that you are the only one who can save the family. She will try to manipulate your empathy because that is the only currency she has left. I looked at the message. I remembered all the times I had wanted a mother-daughter talk. I remembered when I was 12 and needed help with bullies at school, and she told me to toughen up because she was busy with a charity gala. I remembered when grandfather fell, and she didn't visit for 3 weeks because she was redecorating. I typed a reply. Marjorie, I have signed a directive. All communication must be in writing and directed to my attorney, Mason Klein, if you have concerns about Dean's health. I suggest you call 911. Do not come to my apartment. I hit send. It felt cold. It felt cruel. But it also felt like cutting a rope that had been strangling me for decades. Good, Mason said, seeing me put the phone down. You are learning. She is scared, I said. She should be, Mason replied. She spent 30 years enabling a man who treated his company like a piggy bank and his father like an inconvenience. The bill has come due. Just then, another notification chimed. This one was from the Stonegate app. Distribution alert. Initial disbursement ready. I opened the app. It was the first scheduled payout from the liquid assets of the trust. The number on the screen was staggering. It was more money than I had made in 10 years of working at the library. But there was a red banner across the top of the screen. Security hold active. Remote transfer disabled. In-person verification required. What is this? I asked Mason. It is the new protocol, Mason said. After the hacking attempt, Drew locked down the disbursement method. They will not wire the money. You have to physically go to the Stonegate office, sit in a room with a biometric scanner, and sign for it. They are not taking any chances with electronic interception. So Sloane cannot touch it, I said. Sloane could not touch it if she had the password to God's computer, Mason said. But here is the beautiful part. Because Sloane triggered the reimbursement clause and the litigation freeze, her own distribution is set to 0. The system shows her balance, but the available to withdraw line is grayed out. She can see the money, I said, realizing the psychological torture of it. She can log in. Well, she could if she wasn't blocked, and see her share, but she can't touch it. It is the tantalus punishment, Mason agreed. The fruit is right there, hanging just out of reach, and every time she files a motion, the fruit gets a little smaller because the legal fees eat away at it. The next morning, the fallout from the Lake County filing hit. The judge in Lake County didn't even schedule a hearing. He issued a generic order 5 hours after the filing. Dismissed for improper venue pursuant to Trust Instrument Section 22. Case closed. It was a humiliation. Sloane's lawyers, whoever she had found to replace Trent, had clearly not read the deed properly. They had billed her for a filing that was dead on arrival, but the damage was done. The instruction memo freeze was in effect. Dean called Mason's office. He was screaming. We could hear him through the door of the conference room. He was shouting about payroll, about bridge loans, about how the trust owed him liquidity. Mason put him on speaker but didn't say a word. He just let Dean scream. "You are killing my company," Dean roared. "I have payroll on Friday. If that money doesn't move, 500 people lose their jobs." "That is unfortunate, Mr. West," Mason said calmly when Dean finally paused for breath. "But the freeze is automatic. It was triggered by Ms. Carver's lawsuit in Lake County. If you want the freeze lifted, you need to convince your stepdaughter to stop suing the trust. We have no control over it. We are just following the memo." There was a silence on the other end. A heavy, suffocating silence. Dean realized the truth. He couldn't bully us. He couldn't bully the trust. The only person standing between him and the money he needed was Sloane. "She did this?" Dean whispered. "She filed the suit," Mason said. "The suit triggered the freeze. It is an automated response designed to protect the assets from fragmentation. Talk to her, Dean." The line went dead. I looked at Mason. "You just started a civil war." "I did not start it," Mason said, closing the file. "I just pointed out who was holding the gun." Sloane was about to find out that being the favorite daughter only lasts as long as the money does. Dean needed that cash to stay out of jail. Sloane had just frozen it. The dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the bystander. The real fight was now between the father who needed to loot the estate to cover his crimes, and the daughter whose desperate legal flailing had just locked the vault. "I need to go to Stonegate," I said, standing up. "I need to do the verification." "I will drive you," Mason said. "And Aurora, when you see the money, don't feel guilty. It is not their money you are taking. It is the money they would have wasted." We drove to the tower. The city looked different today. Sharper, clearer. When we got to the compliance office, Drew Rourke was waiting. He didn't offer a handshake. He just nodded and led us to a small room with a retinal scanner and a thumbprint pad. "Ms. West," Drew said, "this is the first distribution. It covers the maintenance of the properties and your living allowance for the quarter." I placed my thumb on the scanner. A green light flashed. Identity verified. Transfer initiated. It was done. No drama, no shouting, just a quiet, digital confirmation of my grandfather's will. As we walked out, I checked my phone. There was a new email from the court system. A notification of a filing withdrawal. Sloane had dropped the Lake County suit. It had lasted less than 24 hours. Dean must have gotten to her, but it was too late. The reimbursement trigger had already logged the cost of Drew's time and Mason's time to fight it. That bill would be deducted from her share. And the freeze? The memo said the freeze lasted until forfeiture is confirmed. "Mason," I asked, "even if she dropped the suit, the freeze stays?" "Until the judge rules on the sanctions," Mason confirmed. Grant West wanted to make sure they couldn't file. Drop, and file again just to harass us. Once the bell rings, the doors stay locked until the referee says it is over. Sloane was trapped in a room of her own making. and the walls were closing in. I took a deep breath of the cold city air. "Let's go get some lunch," I said. "I'm buying." "Technically," Mason smiled. "Sloane is buying." "Even better," I said. And for the first time in a year, I smiled. A real smile. The kind that comes when you realize the monster under the bed is just a sad person in a suit, and you are the one holding the light. The final written order from Judge Vance arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 weeks after the sanctions hearing, it did not come with fanfare. It was delivered by a courier in a standard envelope, but the weight of the paper inside felt heavy enough to crush a building. I sat in Mason Klein's office as he read the ruling aloud. The sun was streaming through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peaceful setting for a document that was essentially a financial execution. Judge Vance had not softened his stance. If anything, the written ruling was even more scathing than his verbal dressing down in the courtroom. The order confirmed, with prejudice, that the actions taken by Sloane Carver, specifically the filing of the emergency motion to seize control and the subsequent attempt to digitally breach the trust's security protocols, constituted a direct violation of the no contest clause. The language was precise and unforgiving. The judge ruled that Sloane had acted in bad faith, driven by demonstrable avarice, and that her behavior triggered the forfeiture provision. It wasn't a suspension, it wasn't a penalty, it was a total erasure. Sloane was legally treated as if she had predeceased my grandfather. Her share of the estate, which would have been millions of dollars, was officially voided. But the order went further, because Sloane had used her professional status to attempt the fraud. Judge Vance had forwarded the entire case file to the State Board of Financial Ethics. Mason showed me the notification. The investigation into her license had already been opened. In the world of high net worth wealth management, reputation is the only currency that matters. You can lose money and recover, but you cannot lose trust. Sloane had built her career on the image of the quiet luxury expert, the safe pair of hands. Now, her name was permanently attached to a court order describing her as a predator who tried to rob her own family. She hadn't just lost her inheritance. She had lost her ability to earn a living. Trent Holloway fared no better. The ruling contained a formal censure and a referral to the state bar for his conflict of interest in representing both the company and the individual trying to loot it. Mason told me that Trent's partners had already voted him out of the firm to save their own skins. He was currently looking for office space in strip malls, far away from the high-rise view he used to command. The protective order was the final nail. It was broad and absolute. My family was legally barred from contacting the trustee, the banks, or me regarding any financial matter, if they wanted to ask for money. They had to do it through a lawyer, and given that their lawyers were currently fleeing the sinking ship, the silence was deafening. However, the most satisfying part of the conclusion wasn't what happened to Sloane or Trent. It was what was happening to Dean. The investigation into Westridge Holdings had metastasized. What started as a subpoena for records had turned into a full-blown forensic audit. The process server in the hallway had been the first drop of rain. Now, it was a hurricane. The state investigators had found the discrepancies Dean had been trying to hide, the loans taken against company stock, the creative accounting used to cover personal debts, and the unauthorized use of corporate IT resources to facilitate Sloane's hacking attempt. Dean was no longer worrying about the trust. He was worrying about indictment. He had been forced to hire a criminal defense team, a group of very expensive lawyers who demanded retainers in cash because they knew his assets were being frozen. For the first time in his life, Dean West was spending his own money to save his own skin. Rather than using family funds to buy his way out of trouble, he wasn't acting anymore. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, haunted look of a man who realizes the walls are made of steel, not drywall. 3 days after the order was signed, I received an email from Drew Rourke. Subject: Distribution confirmation. It was short, professional, and devoid of emotion. It stated that the first distribution of the trust's liquid assets had been cleared. The reimbursement trigger had been applied. deducting the legal fees for Mason and the forensic team from the phantom share that Sloane would have received, ensuring that my portion remained untouched. I logged into the portal, using the new secure dual authentication key Drew had given me, and looked at the balance. The number on the screen was surreal. It was enough money to buy a house, to travel, to never worry about a heating bill or a grocery run again. It was safety. For 10 years. I had lived paycheck to paycheck, counting pennies, worried that a flat tire would bankrupt me. Now, I looked at that number and felt a physical weight lift off my chest. But I didn't go shopping. I didn't buy a sports car. I did exactly what I knew my grandfather would have wanted. I contacted Mason and asked him to draft one more document. Grant West had left a memo of wishes, a non-binding letter suggesting how he hoped his money might be used. He had written that he regretted not doing more for the community that had given him quiet. He loved the library where I worked. He loved the small park by the lake where he used to sit and watch the ducks. So, I established the Grant West Community Grant. I took a significant portion of that first distribution, $200,000, and endowed a fund to support the local library system and to maintain the public parks. I made sure the donation was anonymous, listed only as the Fisherman, which was his nickname for himself. It was a twist that no one in my family would understand. To Dean and Sloane, money was for hoarding, for flashing, for wielding like a club, the idea of giving it away, quietly, to fix a park bench or buy new books, would have seemed like insanity to them. But to me, it felt like the final conversation with him. It was my way of telling him that I heard him. A week later, Marjorie reached out. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She sent a formal email to Mason Klein, requesting a brief meeting with me for the purpose of closure. She explicitly stated she would come alone and would agree to any conditions we set. Mason advised against it. "She is looking for a crack in the armor," he warned. "She wants to see if you are still the daughter she can manipulate." "I know," I said. "But I need to do this. Not for her, for me." We met at a coffee shop in the financial district. Neutral ground. I brought Mason. He sat next to me, a silent sentinel in a gray suit. Marjorie arrived 5 minutes early. She looked smaller than I remembered. The aggressive, polished veneer she usually wore was cracked. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she wasn't wearing her usual stack of gold bracelets. She ordered a tea and held the cup with both hands, as if trying to warm herself. "Your father is likely going to be charged," Marjorie said softly, not looking at me. "The lawyers say it is bad. Westridge might go under." I didn't say anything. I just watched the steam rise from her cup. She is not doing well," Marjorie continued. "She lost the apartment. She is staying with a friend. She keeps asking why you did this to her." I set my coffee cup down on the saucer. The sound was sharp porcelain on porcelain. "I did not do anything to her. Mother," I said. "Sloane did this to herself. She tried to steal. She tried to hack. She tried to destroy the one thing grandfather built to protect us. The court just held up a mirror." Marjorie looked up, her eyes wet. "But we are family. Aurora, does that not count for anything? Can you not just help? A little? Just to keep the house?" It was the old hook, the guilt, the idea that family was a magic word that erased all sins, all abuse, all theft. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. "Family is not a license," I told her, my voice steady. "It is not a permit to abuse people. It is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Grandfather knew that. That is why he locked the doors. He knew that if he left the door open, you would strip the house bare." I stood up. "I will not be funding Dean's defense," I said. "And I will not be bailing Sloane out. The trust is closed to you. If you need money, I suggest you sell the jewelry you bought with the company's missing funds." Marjorie stared at me. She looked shocked, not because I was cruel, but because I was unrecognizable to her. She was looking for the scared girl who sought her approval. That girl was gone. In her place was the trust liaison. the woman who had read the files and signed the directives. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. I walked out of the coffee shop with Mason. I didn't look back. I didn't feel the need to. That evening, as I was sitting in my apartment, reading a book, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "It is not over. You think you won, but you just got lucky. I will find a way back." I knew who it was. Sloane. It was the last gasp of a drowning woman, trying to sound dangerous when she was actually powerless. I didn't reply. I didn't block the number. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to Drew Rourke via the secure app. "Log this," I typed. "Violation of protective order." 10 minutes later, Drew replied, "Logged. We will forward it to the judge and the ethics board in the morning. This will likely extend her suspension. Do not engage." I put the phone down. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of my living room where I kept my important papers. I opened the thick leather folder that contained the copies of the trust, the court orders, and the letters. I pulled out the handwritten note Grandfather had left for me. The ink was blue, his handwriting shaky but determined. Aurora. It read, "If you are reading this, the storm is over. Do not let them tell you that you are cold. You are not cold. You are just protecting the fire." When someone tries to erase you with a story, do not argue with them. Do not scream. Silence is the loudest sound in the courtroom. Fight them with the record. Love, Grandpa. I ran my thumb over the signature. He was right. They had tried to paint me as a villain, as a manipulator, as a destroyer of families. They had spun stories, cried fake tears, and thrown accusations like confetti. But I hadn't fought back with stories. I had fought back with timestamps. I had fought back with logs. I had fought back with the irrevocable truth of a signed contract. I closed the folder and tied the string. The story of the West family drama was over. My story, the one where I lived my life on my own terms, free from their shadow, was just beginning. I turned off the desk lamp, leaving the room in a comfortable, quiet darkness. The man in the black suit had done his job. The paper shield had held, and for the first time in 100 years, the West legacy was in safe hands. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below with your country or city so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please subscribe to Monica Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.